Hello, I am Myriam Louviot. I'm responsible for the Bureau du Livre of the Institut français in Germany, one of the specialized agents of the French embassy in Berlin. Today I'm not in Frankfurt, I'm not in Berlin, but I'm in France, near Mâcon, that is in the park of the Castle Rigny. This is a very nice environment where we hold a festival, Manufacture des Idées. And as a part of this festival, where we welcome every year scientists, writers, artists, natural scientists, we host this special encounter between two European philosophers who are Bruno Latour and Hartmut Rosa. This meeting is in a very wide environment, in a debate that is organized by the Institut français d'Allemagne, and that will take place in the next month. Let me present our speakers. Bruno Latour, he's a sociologist, anthropologist, philosopher of science, and he is interested in the recent developments like microbes, politics, relations to the environment. One of the most important voices in this field. His last book is discussing the contexts of inequality, the environment. Hartmut Rosa is a sociologist and philosopher. He's a professor at the Friedrich Schiller University of Jena, and he is director of the Max Weber Kolleg Erfurt. He has worked on the alienation phenomenon in society and the growth contexts. In one of his recent texts, Resonance and Non-Availability, in French, Résonance et rendre le monde indisponible. Bruno Latour and Hartmut Rosa have met before, but now we are hosting this event, this interview, and that's the first time where we hold this conversation between these two gentlemen. It's a great privilege to listen to their exchange of ideas. So they're going to discuss without a moderator. I'm going to give you the floor, and you can discuss the effects of the corona crisis on our society, and maybe also the links between their work, their respective work. What is inspiring? What are the differences between the two gentlemen? What are the opposing ideas they discuss? And now it'll be quite interesting to listen to their conversation. First of all, before the speakers take the floor, I would like to thank our partners, Festival Manufacture des Idées, who is hosting this event, but also Weltempfang from Frankfurt Book Fair, who organized the event. I would also like to thank Literarisches Colloquium Berlin and Institut français in Frankfurt, our partner. I hope that you will enjoy this inspiring encounter between our two philosophers. Thank you.
Since I'm in France, I will be the one starting, Hartmut. And we are here to discuss the very surprising fact that we both developed thought and sociology and philosophies about a lot of things. And we were, I think it's fair to say, both of us slightly marginal in terms of our interest. I was interested in technology, I was interested in what we call non-humans, I was interested in lots of things. And people were not sure this was really part of sociology. You were interested in lots of things about modernity as well as me, but you were also not accused, but I mean perplexed. That people were perplexed. I mean, is this thing about speed really important? Is it part of sociology? And when you did resonance, I think it was even more difficult for sociologists to say, is this psychology? Why does it talk about all these personal things? This is no longer sociology. And then, suddenly, the year with the pandemic and the incredible series of catastrophes in which we were sort of transported, I think mean that our two approaches, even though there are lots of different nuances that we are going to talk about, became central. Because if there is one experience for which we can test simultaneously your all your argument about late modernity, the lock-in was a perfect sort of natural experiment to do it. And of course, the whole thing about resonance, now that we speak with,
that's right.
with these masks and we have to keep at a distance and so on and so forth, is another test. And so is the, I don't know the name in German of that book.
Unverfügbarkeit.
It's the same, which is very close to question I was interested in. So we both have too much luck, so to speak, that certainly the period resonate with what we were doing in our different ways.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, so I think it's been a quite interesting way. I mean, for me, I'm very happy to have the chance to talk to Bruno Latour today, because actually it's quite interesting. My students and the people, the younger guys working with me, they started to have a great interest in your work for a long time, right? I mean, starting with your analysis of how science really is done, right? The laboratory work and so on, and then through the environmental analysis and through the method actor network analysis and your concerns for the environments and so on. And I must say that at first I was quite skeptical, right? And it took me quite some time until I all of a sudden started to read you actually as a sociologist and anthropologist and a philosopher, right? Of the modes of what you did then in the modes of existence, right? Relating to the world, looking for a different way of interacting, not just with people, but also with things and maybe with the whole of the planet. And this is how I then all of a sudden thought, oh, Bruno Latour is the guy, right, who could point the way forward. And I totally agree that this COVID experience we are in the middle of, right, seems to be the kind of the focal point where
exaggeration, or even an exaggeration of
a
natural
it's
experiment.
Very strange. It's a very strange experience where you can really see what at least you see, I believe, some of the problems we were in all the time, or even before COVID, right? But now it comes.
So before we arrive to COVID, maybe we could clarify for our listeners, because basically our two views coincide somewhat around the notion of modernity.
Yeah.
You are more interested in what you call late modernity. I'm more interested in the sort of earlier definition, which...
Yeah, we never arrived in modernity in your
yes,
view,
right?
We
have always been sort of... Modernity has always been something which we try to, but in the diagnosis we both make on the strangeness of modernity, I think we agree.
Yes.
Which is, it's a very exotic way of handling the world, so to speak. So it depends. The chronology here is no important. So I would be interested in if you could, for the readers, with listeners, summarize what you mean by modernity, because in a way you always try to define it in terms which talk to modernity, but different from the way I would do it, and then that clarify maybe for the...
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting because it's an interesting question, because I wonder if we take my definition of modernity, whether you would agree that we are a modern society, so we have been modern, right? Because I was started to get interested in the way we deal with time, right, and the temporality, and I thought, or I realized, and actually there are a lot of people in France who have thought along those lines, like Paul Virilio, for example, but Jean Baudrillard also, or even Proust, right, à la recherche du temps perdu. That modernity it seems to be a change in the way we are living in temporal terms, right? It's a speeding up of life, right? And in many realms, it's speeding up technologically in transport, communication, production. But there's also an increase in the speed of change and an increase in the pace of life. People try to live at a faster pace. So now, but my definition of modernity really is not that things might speed up because maybe you find other societies where this happened, right? But that it's a necessity. I call it dynamic stabilization. So I claim that about in the 18th century, around that time, it's always a process, right? The fabric of society changed mainly in the economic realm, but not just there, even in the sciences and in the arts and in politics, right? that you could only stabilize the institutions which are there through an increase, through speeding up, you could say. Like, of course, it has a lot to do with economic growth also, right? We need to grow, we need to come up with innovations, we need to increase speed and productivity and so on, just in order to stay where we are, right? You see it most clearly in the economy, right? Without economic growth, we lose jobs, companies close down, we cannot support the health system and the educational system and so on. So my definition of modernity is not it's the society which develops speed or discovers speed or so, but it's a society, a form of society that forces us to permanently increase speed in order to stay where we are. And then I looked at what is driving us, what is the ambitions, the desires, but also the anxieties and the fear, right? And that's what made me then, for example, which went into the book Rendre le monde indisponible, Unverfügbarkeit. I claim that in cultural perspectives, it's the attempt to control the world, right? To command it, to make it disponible, so to speak. And these two things went together. The desire to I also call it stretching the horizon of what is available and attainable and accessible, right? As far as possible. What is possible, what is attainable scientifically, technologically, economically, what can you regulate politically, and so on. So I would claim a modern society is a society driven by the desire to expand the horizon of the available, to control the horizon of the available, and which is forced to permanently increase speed and production and innovation in order to stay as it is.
And that's of course why the pandemic and plus the ecological mutation together are of course hitting straight into this definition of modernity. So let me try mine, which has a lot of connection with yours. Just one little point maybe of nuance, which is it is based on time, but it is based on a difficulty which is of course verified now with the ecological mutation, to break the time into the past and the future. So it's actually, if we want a definition of modern, what it is to be modern, reduced to its really essential part is to say no longer the past.
I agree.
And let's break.
Yes.
And it's breach, which actually explain a lot of the anxiety and difficulty that you have studied so much in your the list of things which the resonance should bring back and has been broken by modernity, precisely because we cannot pass anymore, because the breach has been
totally agree. Yeah.
And that's done, and that's again a chronological question, much earlier than the acceleration that we made, because for me lots of the features of modernity, of late modernity, are really late modernity. I mean, it's post-war. Yeah. It's actually qualified by, very nicely correlated with what geologists call the Great Acceleration, that is the 1945, basically, or the Anthropocene, or whatever the term is. Before, you didn't have that much of the acceleration which has interested you so much, even though the theme of accelerating, but you had the theme of breaking with the past. Yeah. And it's true of the revolutionary ideal, and it's true, of course, of the religious ideal, the sort of a Gnostic ideal of moving away from.
Yeah, exactly. Mm.
So a lot of the things you describe in terms of time, I've been as much interested in terms of space. That is, this idea of
breaking,
lifting out and going somewhere else, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that it's possible not to belong to the earth, basically. Yeah. And of course, again, for this definition of modernity, which has never happened for me, because by definition you cannot break away. You are always brought back. And that's where all of the dystopic and element which you analyze as anxiety, I analyze them as well as a sort of disconnection between what you claim to be, which is going in another space, and yet you cannot go into this other space because we have never been modern. I mean, it's impossible to be modern. You cannot even accelerate for real. I mean, you still stuck into your body. And again, here, just like for you, coming back to the first question, which is really nice, the COVID, boom, is a verification, so to speak.
Yeah.
And all of the questions about what is the economy going to be if you have to decelerate, what the economy has to be if we have to land back on Earth, and so on and so forth, becomes topical. So on modernity, we are really on the close.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way you just put it. I mean, I believe that the acceleration story actually, in my view, starts before 1945 or so. I really think, when you read Goethe, for example, right, or maybe you can even start with Shakespeare or Jean-Jacques Rousseau or so, or Karl Marx for that matter, right? When you read the Communist Manifesto, it's really a document of speeding up the world, right? He says the bourgeoisie is
a word out of which you have broken. So for me, the bridge would be more important.
Yeah, that's what I want. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I've just written a new piece on COVID actually, where I came back to an idea which I took from Charles Taylor. Right, I somehow expanded or extended Taylor. He says it's a spiritual declaration of independence from nature, but I would say also from history. Right, and it's exactly as you say, this attempt. I call it, spiritual declaration of independence. I like this term because it's the idea that the past no longer ties us or binds us or has actually any significance because we make the world anew. And nature should not be the one commanding us because we command it, and so on. And even in politically, right? I mean, it's us, the people, who decide how things are. So I think it's a spiritual declaration of independence. And I find your take very plausible that this might be the cultural aspiration or maybe the ideology. But in fact, of course, we never could break out of nature or history or society.
That's why I would add the Voegelin Gnostic layer on here, because this sort of very strange way of breaking away, we don't want to, what you call declaration of independence, and also the sheer impossibility of getting away.
Yeah.
So, and this very strange mixtures of hate for the materiality and claimed achievement, that we are actually pragmatic, and what the COVID made us realize that we are not pragmatic nor realist at all. And we are not even materialist, because materialism means that you are interested in all of those things that these people were talking about, trees and bacteria and all sorts of other things. So we lived in modernity, short or long or late, in extraordinary unrealistic terms, life, so to speak. So it's very interesting that now, fortunately, everybody understands that we will never be modern.
So what would be your main take on the virus? What is it doing to us?
Well, the virus, of course, I welcomed it, so to speak, because I had studied the microbe quite a lot with Pasteur. So the idea that a virus changed society, I mean, I said, this has been done already.
Yeah.
But of course, the great interest for me was as a sort of general rehearsal for the ecological mutation.
Yeah.
And of course, with a huge, fascinating difference that the state, I mean, your state and our state, even though your state apparently did that better than France, I mean, this is disputed.
Even Germany,
was equipped and had the authority to do something like the lock-in. But if you had the same people, Muti or our president, make any decision about the ecological mutation, we stop cars,
in the climate crisis,
it would have been riots immediately.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was very interesting that the two crises are embedded into one another.
Yeah.
But the first one is an old one. I mean, health. We know the state has a right to protect our health.
Yeah.
A state which has to protect our long-term health, us plus all our dependents, so to speak, doesn't have it.
Yeah.
So my intervention, and I'd like to know your intervention, because maybe I've missed some of the German things you did in the media. Yeah. My intervention was to say, okay, let's use the COVID as a moment to think, since the economy has been put on pause.
Yes, exactly.
What do we want to do later?
Yeah.
What should we stop and what should we continue?
Yeah.
Because even if the COVID disappears, the ecological mutation is still with us forever.
Yeah.
And that's not just 100,000 or million people who are in danger. I mean, it's the whole of us, so to speak. So and it had a great impact, which was very funny. I mean, this little piece I wrote in a completely obscure journal is translated in all sorts of languages,
That's
and
good,
people
yeah.
began to think about it. Why? Because it's a rehearsal.
Yeah, for the
It
big
says,
thing.
okay, we will have to do that anyway.
Yeah.
By chance, the virus pushes to do it now. But of course, it changed a lot of the things you are interested in as well,
Yes.
which are all the prime of relation, human relation. Because, of course, you are more interested in human relation than I am. I'm more interested in non-human relations, so to speak. But still, the whole argument is that we are the same. So, how would you define your intervention in the German polity, so to speak?
Yeah, actually, I think it's surprisingly close. I almost I think we have the same take on it, right? Because I mean, of course, at first I would say it has been an incredible slowdown. I think for the first time in the last 2 centuries or so, things really slowed down. Because I mean, you know what? Something that the Club of Rome report, for example, and the discussion on it, or the Green parties, or even the Friday for Futures and the Paris Climate Accord, they did almost nothing. When you look, for example, to the physical mobility, the number of flights went up, the number of trains and planes and cars and ships and the size of ships went up. So my first point really is that when you look at the physical movement, the physical mobility on Earth, carbon driven almost exclusively, right? It actually went up even through war periods and even through recessions. But now, for at least a few months, right, it actually slowed down. So that's the first point. And the interesting point there is, and you hinted at this, it wasn't the virus which made the planes grounded. Yeah, it was political action.
Yeah.
And this is why I like your argument about the rehearsal, right? So I think one experience which maybe we can draw some optimism from, right, is that we have seen it is possible to politically interact with the economy and with the world in almost a huge sense, right? It was political action that did make a significant change, and of course the interesting question is why or will we? And then I argue, as you do. I mean, I make exactly the same argument. I say these kind of crises, when the routines and the chains of interaction are broken for some time, right? Those are the moments where you have a kind of historical bifurcation almost, right? Where the paths can change. So now society is in a way almost placed on hold, where we have to decide, do we want to go back to the old normal, or do we want to look out for new solutions? And then we realize pretty quickly that the old normal is not normal, but it's very abnormal. It's a kind of insane state of affairs anyway, right? So it does give us a certain chance of...
But how do you work out what is, for me, the greatest difficulty, which is that precisely for health questions, which are our personal health, the state as an authority, which explained why it was so easy, so to speak. I mean, the obedience of the German and the French was just absolutely amazing. I mean, I know some people have demonstrated against it,
but generally,
but I mean, it's massive.
Yes.
So it means that we sort of imbue in the state an authority on those questions, which allow the state to declare a state of emergency, so to speak, for our health.
Yes.
It's nothing like that for ecological reason, which is our extended health, so to speak. The state would be completely disputed if
it did something like
if
that.
We were doing, no? So how do we charge the state with a similar type of authority for the questions which are life-threatening in a different way?
Yeah, because they are also life-threatening. I mean, when it comes to health, I think the interesting point we've seen there is that people realized, and that's a kind of against the neoliberal main trend, that health is not a private thing, right? I think before COVID-19, right, the idea was that it's my health. I'm responsible for my health and you're responsible for your health. And then people, with COVID, the experience was health is a collective thing. My health is of relevance to you and your health is of relevance to me. And I think, at least in the German case, but I think it was the case almost on a global level, the main perception was not the state is imposing something on us. At least that's the way I want to interpret it, right? It's not the state which captures an authority and imposes it on us, but it's the perception that we, the people, I would almost say, right, are in danger. So now we have to look for a solution, and the state is the instrument through which we react to the danger. And I think logically, it's not so difficult to transpose this to the ecological question,
Logically,
right? Because
no, but
yeah, but practically it is. Yeah, practically it is.
it's
I
interesting,
don't know.
but it might be a slightly different reaction in France and in Germany,
Yeah, okay.
where the legitimacy of a state might have been bigger in Germany. So we had the feeling of some sort of arbitrary
Yeah.
authority. I couldn't walk 1 more kilometers around my house.
Yeah, I mean that's
I was
measures
forced
were
to
stricter.
turn around garden instead of getting into a garden. So, but it's
But it didn't lead to huge protests, right?
no, people love to obey when it's for health. By the way, I would disagree with what you said because the idea that it's not my health but it's public health. That's public health in the 19th century. That's very
That's
invention.
right. Yeah, that's right.
That
Yeah.
Koch and Pasteur.
Yeah.
So once again, and that might be a small criticism, lots of things you attribute to late modernity cannot be pushed before the war, because this idea that it's my health is a completely after-war
Yeah, I totally agree.
idea.
Yeah, I agree with this.
Because
I agree
people
with this.
before health, by definition, would be a state question.
Yeah, I
mean,
wouldn't attribute that to not even to modernity. Yeah, but I would
so
call this a
there are things
neoliberal ideology.
which are it's your interest in acceleration.
Yeah.
But I want now to get to the new argument. I mean, first I want to know in which way all of the social distancing and mask and so on,
Yeah.
how do you interpret it in terms of your resonance argument? For example, is it fabulous to be able to teach on a
Of course
Zoom
not.
instead of
Yeah.
teaching?
I don't know what your experience there is there. I hate it actually. I was
I
one
hate
of
it
the
too.
first who signed a petition against the. I think there's a real. I really believe there's a real social danger there. That universities are the only places, institutions I know of in our society who do not protest being kind of locked down. I mean, every school and every kindergarten and every company and every theater and every cinema and even the soccer clubs, they claim we want to go back to the real physical
And not the
interaction.
university?
And universities say, oh, we are fine. We're already doing digital plans, and it's the same in Cambridge and in Harvard and everywhere. I'm not exactly sure about France, but
That's amazing. I thought it was because we have a legal department and that they are too worried about being sued or something like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, one thing I do accept is that, of course, universities are kind of super spreader institutions, right? Because people from, they converge from huge places. But but I'm very concerned about this because, teachers or professors might find it quite useful. They can stay at home in their countryside and teach from there. And students might find it good too because they don't have to move, right? And the universities save a lot of money because they don't need the space. And politicians might actually think, oh, that's a good idea because student populations student towns are always the places for innovation and even revolution. I heard that about Brazil, for example. Some colleagues wrote to me that actually the Brazilian government is exactly doing this, right? Trying to get rid of university social science.
Since
population.
we are your philosophy here as a natural experiment. So
Yeah.
what happened to resonance argument and the
Yes.
list of elements if you stop, if you put people at 2 meters, if you mask them,
Yeah.
if you Zoom them instead of talking to them? I mean, in what way is it a shift of society? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, first of all, of course, you see that it's not about the cognitive things, right? I mean, because I think I can teach you some substance, some stuff through the Zoom or whatever it is, or even in a written way. But it's the interactional thing, of course, which is kind of disturbed,
it's
right?
important for cognitive.
Yeah. And I think this is really important in university life. You somehow have to appropriate things through real interaction. And of course, the social distancing. I mean, even the word is quite bad, right? Because we don't aim for social distance, we just aim for spatial distance, right? And distancing is almost creating a social distance where there was none before. I find this a very strange word, right? But the fact, of course, I mean, you know, the eyes and the voice or the face is, I call it a window of resonance. It's where you see also the small resonances in the, you know, in the facial expressions and so on. And the fact that, you know, I find it phenomenologically speaking very interesting. It's there's a distrust coming in my relationship to the world. You know, I always claim I'm interested in how do we relate to the world. And now there is a distrust, which means I have to cover myself from direct interaction, right, from the intake and the output, so to speak, and to mask myself towards it. And there's the feeling, you know, that the other is a danger to me. I mean, that's not a new feeling, right? I think modernity, Georg Simmel wrote about this, that there's a kind of latent aversion against the other. But now it has become really physical. A lot of people claim that you feel it when someone comes close. You are about to push him or her away. And let me make one more point that I want to ask you, right? Because I think you also see it, you know, that there is, I mean, my take in my books, in the Resonance book, for example, has always been that there is a deep distortion in the way we are situated in the world, or better, to the world, in the way we relate to the world. You see it in eating disorders and many other things, right? But I think this sense of something is wrong here has now become really physical reality, right? The COVID or the SARS-CoV, the coronavirus, could be in the air, it could be anywhere, it might even be already in my body without my knowing it. So I think the distrust, which is a central element of modernity, at least in the late modern stage, right, has now become a kind of, COVID is a screen for projection for this. Or what do you think?
Well, I was thinking a different line, which is the extraordinary speed and delight at which people get when they have to obey all those rules, which is in France quite extraordinary. I mean, I had a haircut the other day. I mean, the lady is in as a mask plus a mask plus a window. Then she asked me to wash. Then she washed my seat after the seat could not have any virus in it, and with an excess. And I said maybe I can take my mask and say c'est obligatoire, with a delight.
You really think so? I didn't notice
with
that.
a delight, and I felt that it was, yes, maybe but it was not out of fret. It was out of pleasure of ritualizing an exchange and making it slightly difficult. So adding intermediaries to the
relationship,
which is, of course, here we might have a sort of differing take on mediation, because for me, of course, the more mediation, the better, and which is a way of resonating, but slightly different from what you are interested in pointing out. Anyway, I was very interested in. I felt she was in a ritual, and precisely interrupting the ease with which people get in and the ordinary life was actually an advantage, and maybe I'm exaggerating.
That's interesting.
I was very surprised by that.
I would be frightened by that.
And it's not just obedience to the state. I mean, it's not just because the French never very spontaneously obey the state. I mean, they would immediately cut short. Do the shortcut. Why do the French don't do shortcut? It's very surprising for me, and I'm interested in the. It also complicates relations, which means remind us that relations are always complicated, and it's never smooth. You see what I mean? So this is why I want to interview you on this book, which, of course, as you imagine, I have a completely different. I mean, the same. The symptoms are the same. This mixtures of ease of access and withdrawing, so to speak, of the
and you never really get it.
Which for me is completely connected to the lack of soil, so to speak. And this is a question I've always wanted to ask you, because I don't know if you have been accused of the same thing, but everybody who is interested in sociology of relation, sociology of resonance, or like myself, sociology of land and soil, etc., is immediately associated with reactionary
that's a problem.
Politics. Well, it's a problem, but it's also true It's also true that reactionary, I mean, I have a great interest in Carl Schmitt, and he's always a Prime Minister German.
I don't like him.
But because precisely he saw something about the ecological crisis, even though he was not interested in ecology, which is precisely the disjunction between the modernity in which we are supposed to live and the world in which we live for good.
Yeah.
And this disconnection is actually accelerated by the news every day about the ecological mutation. So in your two latest book, you mention ecology, but it's slightly marginal in your, I mean, it's not central
it's
to
true,
the diagnosis.
Yes.
When I read this one, I said that access and no access, this sort of dialectical contradiction, it's exactly another way of talking about the fact that we are on the land and we are not on the land. I mean, we don't reside on a land which has any workable existence, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely, I mean, that's another thing which I found very interesting about the COVID crisis. I really believe, I wonder whether you share this idea, that it has changed the way we are situated on the soil, you could almost say, or I would say in space, right? Because in the normally, particularly in the those, of course, only in those milieux or parts of the world who were well off, right? There was a permanent kind of mobility, right? And people thought of being here and being there, and also.
So then you are stuck.
Yeah, and now it's really true that people were stuck to their place they live, to their apartment or so, and then the space kind of had a kind of concentric shape around it, like it was, at least as we think it was, in ancient times, right? There was the kind of where you live is the center of your world. And then it extends. I mean, you only have access to, you said, 1 kilometer or so around the thing, and then 10 kilometers gets already difficult, and China or the US are totally out of reach. And it's the same temporally. We have changed because you could not plan for more than 2 weeks. Nobody had the slightest clue about what the world would be like in 2 weeks.
Yes, that's true. Interesting. Yeah.
So
it's space and time. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a kind of putting us down. But I mean, your question.
But you don't answer my questions.
Yes, exactly. That's what I wanted to come back on the ecological question. I think I've moved more to the ecological question, partially with the help of your books, right? As I said, I had a kind of aha moment by reading your books when I Mode d'existence, for example, but also the Gaia stuff you wrote. And this is something I want to ask you. I mean, my idea is there is a problem, there is a distortion in the way we relate to the world. That was my claim, right? And I think it's particularly a distortion in the way we relate to things, to objects, but also to what I call the totality of the world. And I claim that maybe this is why you want to use the term of Gaia, because it kind of gives this other thing a kind of agency, right? There is something living, something answering. What I'm always trying to get at is that we need a kind of answering. My claim is the main stance is one of control and domination, right? And we need to change that into one of listening and answering. There's something going on out there, something. And I think we need probably a sense of agency for this, right? To regain a sense of agency. And then it becomes a game of listening and answering, and that we have lost this sense. I mean, I really believe, and I always refer to you, right, with quotes and to your books, that modern society, for me it's modern society, you're right, I always use this. We have actually lost the sense of any kind of resonant relationship to everything else except human beings. We believe the only things that are capable of listening and answering are other human beings, right? And then maybe, and that's wrong.
Why is this? I mean, because that's an invention of sociology, right? Why is it that we have?
It's not just. I'm not sure.
Who invented the idea that humans are related to humans?
It wasn't me.
No, of course.
But sociology is.
What is your genealogy of that?
Yeah, it's interesting, but I would say, sociology comes so late in the historical development of modernity. I mean, it starts around 1900, basically. Or normally I would say it starts with Marx, but that's then the second half or so of the 19th century. And I think this starts earlier. I mean, I do believe that's why I like, you know, Charles Taylor's Sources of the Self, where I do believe I think there's it's a double movement. That's always my take. I mean, it has cultural intellectual movements which starts with the Enlightenment, for example, and that kind of thinking, I believe, the distance or the break can be seen. But then it's also an institutional break, which comes with capitalism, with a different way of, you know, seeing Earth. I mean, that's actually something the sociologists have described, but not invented, right? That nature, let's call it nature, becomes either the resource I can use or the object I can shape, right? And that's kind of breaking our experience, the experiences of a different sorts. And in my view, this reduces the modes of existence to almost one mode of existence, right? When everything around you is the thing you use. So.
But still, we have never been modern, so we have all the others simultaneously. But you didn't answer my question about reactionary politics.
Oh, the reactionary stuff.
Let me do a little thought experiment.
Okay, yeah.
Now with the COVID and the lock-in, we let's say people will say, okay, now we have a human who is connected to all these things that Latour talk about, non-human. And then it's a human which is resonate with all sorts of things. He has a body, is understanding the sound and so on in the way Hartmut, Rosa talk about. So now we have a very different human.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to understand, is Rosa a humanist or not? Because I'm not completely sure. It's a human which is equipped with so many...
Okay, but I will put that best question back to you. Okay. I mean, no, it's a good question. I mean, let me start with the reactionary stuff. Yes, I do get blamed with a kind of having conservative, reactionary, whatever tendencies. Actually, that's something that I had to deal with, you know, since I did my dissertation on Charles Taylor, because there I was on communitarianism, right, thinking of community and identity.
Yes, okay. So it started early.
It starts early, and I think I shifted a bit, because now I'm no longer, and I think it's similar to what you do. I'm no longer insisting on, that's something I wanted to ask you anyway. I don't insist anymore on identity. I don't think it's important for human beings to have an identity.
No, we're on the same line here.
Yes, because we change it, right? But I even read the stuff you wrote also on religion, right? I think, and that's how I interpreted your whole book on the modes of existence, that there is this deep yearning for being touched, being called by something. That's a line I take from your book. Human beings need to be called by something and then letting themselves be transformed in a certain way, right? So I think I have become less conservative, but there's always this claim, right? Whatever you do, the resonance yearning is conservative or reactionary. I must say that in the end I don't care too much. I mean, they can claim whatever they want. I mean, I think when I read your stuff or when I try to develop my ideas, I mean, for me it's very clear they are not conservative, because I don't try to preserve any tradition, and I certainly don't want to say something has to be because it was like that in the past, and I don't insist on identities and this kind of stuff. So I would almost say...
Right, but I was making a thought experiment.
And then the humanism.
In which someone was
the...
mixing your resonating human with my resonating to non-human. What is left of the shape and ability and traditional definition of a human?
Yeah, I don't know.
Which is what people would say, reacting to the COVID crisis, to the ecological crisis. They say, yes, but we have a superiority of being much more interesting and conscious than this Aspen. We need to, we are really defined by our difference. See, another experiment is that what happened when Hartmut, Rosa reread Roquentin's in Sartre, Nausée.
Yeah.
You see the tree there.
Yes.
And as you know, he thought it was so horrible and so frightening that he vomits on it. You will not vomit on it.
No.
So the roots of this tree will get to you. You will resonate with the tree.
Yes.
And you will have a very different attitude vis-à-vis this word. I add to that the fact that, like these people we are in this festival talking about, they would say it's the same for the trees, it's the same for the birds, it's the same for the earthworm, etc. They all have their way of resonating and being mixed together.
Yeah, I mean
But it's a very different view of what is a human.
Yes. So what?
Compared to late modernity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to defend the late modern view of what is a human because I want to overcome late modernity.
That's
I
what
want
I
to
said,
overcome modernity altogether. I think we are in the
Okay.
same.
Okay.
But nevertheless, I mean, it's true. I think I have a certain. I think it's a certain ambivalence in the resonance book because on the one hand, it's phenomenologically grounded, right? Methodologically, I start from human experience, right, and then I develop this notion that the core of our way of being in the world is resonance, listening and answering, and then you can see that actually human bodies, human brains develop that way. But I have never, even it's in the resonance book, right, to say, well, it's not just human bodies and human beings,
Yeah,
right?
I
You can
remember
see
we
it.
noticed that.
Yeah, you can see it in string theory, whatever it is. I mean, we don't really know what the ultimate reality is, I would really say. But I mean, when it comes to this humanism thing, let me think. I mean, one thing is, of course, should we preserve the human being as it is, or can we go beyond it? There I'm a little scared. I mean, not a transhumanist in that sense, right? But do I want to make a categorical distinction between what a human being is and what other things is? No. I actually want to reduce that, to overcome it. I mean, this is something I need to ask you. I mean, I always run into the trouble when I say, because I do say resonance is a certain form of relationship between two entities. That's what I really claim, right? And the entities don't necessarily need to be human beings. So, for example, I describe that I can get into resonance, let's say, with a mountain. I love the mountain, so I use this very often. Let's say, I don't know, let's take a certain mountain, Kilimanjaro in Africa, maybe, right?
Which has no eyes anymore.
A little bit. And then people say, yes, but it's only projection, right? I feel called by the mountain, but the mountain doesn't care about me. And that actually always puts me in a certain trouble because on the one hand, I have two possibilities. One would be there's an asymmetry. It's only me who resonates with the mountain, but not the mountain. And I want to avoid this. I would say, I don't quite know what the mountain does, but there are good and then I actually refer to Bruno Latour, who says, well, it's not the way the world is. It's a very specific, scientific, modern outlook to think that the mountain certainly cannot react with me. So would you say that the mountain somehow interacts with me? Does he answer me? Does he call me?
Yeah. Well, Gaia, it's
Yes.
basically being in Gaia does the same experience as being in nature.
In what?
In nature.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
This is why I'm so interested in Gaia.
Yeah.
Which is not a totality, by the way. It's
No.
connections of historical and branching of all these entities like trees and bugs and so on and so forth. It does not achieve totality because it's the way of spreading life from 5 billion years ago. So
Okay.
it doesn't have the same globality as the globe, precisely.
Yeah, okay,
We
yeah,
use
yeah.
Peter Sloterdijk argument. It's not a sphere. It is actually, it's more like a lichen.
Yeah.
It expanded. And it was, in the exhibition I'm doing in Karlsruhe, called Critical Zone, we have a beautiful demonstration. But Gaia, when it was 4 billion years ago, was just very thin because it was just a microbial mat.
Okay.
And then, as Lynn Margulis, who is one of the great scientists, the show is about Humboldt, Lovelock, and Margulis.
Yeah.
And a great invention happened, which was trees.
Yes.
And trees built vertically.
Yeah.
But until that, life
a kind of-
was just very, very,
That's
very, very
interesting,
small mat. And it's the mat which produces the oxygen, and then now there is an atmosphere and it's slightly thick, but
So
not much.
So does that mean Gaia is your term for the network of life?
Plus all the things that life has changed, which means water, atmosphere, of course, and heat. And now everybody knows that because of the ecological crisis. So
Yeah.
now when we look at those clouds and the heat, yesterday it was very hot.
Yeah.
We looked at it as a dome, so to speak,
Okay.
not as an infinite space. And that's my answer to your book, so to speak, is these mixtures of accessibility, and certainly we are locked in
Yeah.
by the pandemic, is a metaphor for the extraordinary situation that before we looked at the sky and it was infinite, and suddenly we look at it and say, that's something I have to be worried about.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you react to that, but I think the only thing myself I can look at without being worried is the moon. Because the moon, I have no influence on the moon. the stars, of course, but
No,
we
but
are a
listen,
bit far. But if I look at the sky, it's my job now to take it, right?
No, but yeah, I must say I dislike that idea. I dislike. I understand what you mean. This is the Anthropocene thing, right? It is related to me. I mean, I
I'm
understand.
responsible for the heat.
Yes, I know. In the way I know. I mean, in the way I read your work, I would say I understand. I think you're recapturing this sense of listening and answering, right? It has something to do with me, right? It's not an independent reality. I'm connected to it. I mean, that's the sense.
And that's hard.
Yeah, it's hard enough.
That's the lock-in. That's the other lock-in.
Yeah, but it sounds so threatening. I mean, I must say, and there sometimes I find that maybe I'm more of a romantic than I like to, right? But I do because I'm an astronomer, right? I love to watch the stars. Really, I have an.
The stars is okay. You do nothing with them.
No, but I would. No, but how can you say that? Come on, because I would say that's the idea that the moon has nothing to do with me is part of the natural modern science which you criticize.
No, but
I mean, if all the other cultures had their very strict sense, and actually we do know that the moon has something to do with me.
Yes, but in the other cultures, in our cultures, at least it's not in your
everyday
socially, politically, culturally extension, so to speak. But now, if you look at the temperature, you feel it's not just hot.
But look, the
it's
problem
my
is
hot.
the problem. Why I have a problem with this. Why I have a certain problem with this is that I think it makes me I'm working on a new book which I hope but it will take time, right? Where I say the part of the problem, I wonder what you think about this, of our modern human condition, right? Of the situation we are in right now is that we can only I started to think about it in linguistic terms. I either think I'm the actor, the perpetrator of an action, or I'm the victim, right? Because our languages only have the active and the passive. I'm doing it or I'm suffering it, right? And I think that is a problem, and it particularly becomes obvious when we interact with nature, right? It's not that we command and control it. I claim you see it in the environmental disasters. You see a problem which has become, I believe, our general problem, that we permanently flip between feeling omnipotent and totally powerless, right?
Yes,
for example, we control nature, but then all of a sudden, we can't do anything against the climate disaster.
That's a nice thing with Gaia is that it's made of it precisely ignores completely this distinction, because it's just it's like a lichen. It's the extension of life forms which are all embedded into one another. For example, there is a very famous German book, not a good book, but a very German book by these doctors about our own sort of microbiota, which basically are shit, and it was a huge success. And because people discovered that they are actually more microbiota.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So all of this work, which is associated in the exhibition and in my work with Margulis, with one of his great, is because there is no limit to the definition of ourselves. So the opposition between who is acting
and who is
moot, because
but wait a second. Yeah.
And now we understand that precisely because of the ecological crisis, because now we are locked in. We are locked in the crisis. We are locked in epidemiologically, but we are also locked in because of the
environmental
of the climate question.
Yeah.
But it's a second lock-in, so to speak.
Yeah.
We know that inside this.
Yeah, but look. Okay, but let me. I'm not yet quite finished with my. So I believe the claim is the problem is that we kind of shift between being the perpetrators or the actors or the victims, right? And now I think there is that when you talk about the climate in the way you just did, there are the clouds, and it's us who are responsible for it. Then we are exactly at the same point. It was me who created the dearth or whatever it is.
No.
And now I'm suffering it, and that's what I want to overcome. I'm connected to it. I'm part of it.
Yes, but I'm part of 1 billionth and more recent as an old man from the. See, it's not a choice between responsible or victim. It's a new situation precisely that now I'm as a baby boomer with 73 who has access to all this CO2 emission.
Yeah.
I'm different relation from my son, my little grandchild with just a few weeks, or someone from Africa, etc. It's the differentiation, redistribution of what it is. But still, all of us, we are locked in this space now.
Yeah.
And none of us, especially not people of my age and generation, can look at it and say, well, look, I mean, this is an infinite space.
Yeah.
We are inside the space. And this locked in as consequence for humanism, especially on this question you raised, which is, is am I a victim? Of course, yes, for one part.
In a certain
am I author? Yes, of course. But what about my microbiota? Yesterday there was a talk here about the fact that the microbiota, the microorganisms themselves had been changed by
the climate change.
By antibiotics, for example. We actually, even bacteria who have disappeared on Earth because of the antibiotic, etc. So none of that fit inside the sort of discussion. Is it? Am I acting or am I acted upon? Which was, of course, you're right, the old ways, and then there was the dialectic way of saying we do. All sorts of dialectic. Now, all of that is completely different because we are distributed. DNA, my DNA is only one little part of what I am. If I have to add all the microbes on me, it's several orders of magnitude more DNA than me. There's this beautiful cases in Marguerite's work that when a cow gives birth to another cow, it needs to give birth, so to speak, to the microbes that would make the stomach of a cow able to digest grass. It's not in the DNA of a cow. So it's not the cow that evolved. It's the cow plus all of those other things.
The other things. Yeah. So you really stress the connections, right?
She introduced the word holobiont to describe this sort of thing. It's the holobiont that evolved, not the cow. So
the cow in itself,
And all of that is so interesting to modify precisely the action model, so to speak, of humans. Because then you see that the idea that the choice is between acting or being acted upon is not very interesting. There are lots of other ways of being resonating.
But the thing is, I mean, how do we make a change? I mean, right? I mean, so you have a kind of interconnected system, a network. You can call it Gaia or whatever. But it's the human actions which make the difference, right? We created the problem, now we have to solve it.
Yes, but it's a human which is as different from a human before as in Kafka Metamorphosis Gregor Samsa is on the morning. I mean, it's a completely different being. It's the morning. Imagine now we have...
Who is the different being, the human being or the Gaia?
It's a different...
It's a different world.
When Gregor Samsa wakes up,
he's a bug.
But imagine now you cannot take your plane because you have a CO2
that's true.
Antenna behind you. You cannot breathe because you send your viruses. You cannot do anything because if you do something, eat meat, you immediately have a methane going away, etc. So you are different. Yes, it's a human who have to do the job of politics, but it's a different human. Associated and sort of, I love to reinterpret Kafka's novel because it's nothing to do with psychology or connection with the parents. It's a completely different being. Since the COVID, we wake up, I mean, just as you said, suddenly we are limited, just like...
It's interesting,
We couldn't move this way, we couldn't move this way. And you remember, he's like that, he's looking at his legs, he doesn't know what to do with his legs.
But I don't know. I think that's not completely right, because it wasn't the virus that did any of these things.
No,
it was political action.
It was state,
It was ourselves.
No, it's not the virus. Of course, the virus is, I mean, I studied that many years ago. The virus is just one little part. It's the whole reaction of the whole system to
it has changed the system. I mean, that's true. But I mean, there's one question I definitely need to ask you, right, about agency, because that has become a huge problem for myself, right? And I know you have written a lot on this, right? And I always read you as saying, well, everything that makes a difference in the system, right, that has a certain influence, is an agent in a certain sense. But I would like to ask you to clarify it because of I think of agency, it is something for me. Agency has somehow connected to a will or a volition or a desire. And the question is, if you share, I'm not sure whether you share this definition of agency, but then the interesting question arises, do you think that human beings are the only agents? Probably, I mean, in that sense. Or maybe we start I start by just asking you, how would you define agency?
I have a completely radically bizarre and at the origin entirely semiotic definition of everything that acts. I mean,
Yeah, okay, but that's...
And since we cannot tell any stories without making things act, then we can attribute volition in addition, or withdraw volition, and then we can add desire or withdraw desire. But that's a secondary step. This is why I learned from my semiotic friends the distinction between actors and actant.
Yeah.
And the actant is always more fundamental than it
the
can
actor.
be equipped.
Yeah.
It can be equipped with all sorts of other antenna, so to speak. So it can, I mean, the traditional example, of course, is War and Peace. I mean, a novel would have in one page 30 definitions of what it is to act, with will or no will, or intention or distortion, and so on and so forth. And this model coming from literature is, I think, a very, very, very profound insight on philosophy. I mean, on the understanding of, and since I started with scientific literature, and I've always been absolutely struck by the fact that the scientific literature claims to be about agents having no will,
sense.
If you cite the scientific article is making things do enormous numbers of action. And then you can ask, well, yes, but of course it's about scientific agent, and it's about non-human doing nothing in the world. But that's, and here we would agree, that's the addition, the ideological addition made by modernity. No, this time not late modernity, early modernity.
Was early modernity. Yeah.
But as I often said, the de-animation, which was perpetrated by this modernity, doesn't take off the agency. I mean, just one role.
Yeah.
You trees, you technology, you stone, from now on, you'll play the role of dead object.
Yes, exactly.
So that's an attribution of a certain type of agent, which is like someone doing nothing in the spectacle. But it's not the norm. The norm is that things do things. I mean, it's fairly simple argument.
Yes, and how is it really? I mean, we don't know, right? I mean, I read your work as saying it's a kind of co-construction, right? Reality is a kind of, I mean, isn't that the heart of your philosophy?
But again, I think the COVID and the ecological crisis sort of pushed us into this is a rather realistic definition of agency.
I totally agree with that. I mean, the situation you said, I mean, we are now in a new situation, right? And that clearly was a co-construction. The virus did something, there was some kind of material reality, and there was interpretation and political action and even physical sensations, right? And this is, so reality is not, I think but that's exactly what you always said, right? I mean, we had, before Bruno Latour, we had to decide either we were constructivists, saying that everything is kind of discourse, or we were realists. There's the real reality on which we project something. And then, am I correct in thinking that
the ecological crisis solved the question for us?
Would you do it? Yeah, it's probably true. It solves that question for us. Yeah.
No, I think it's questions which were before. This question looked abstract and metaphysical, and maybe this is a good way to end our discussion.
Because now it's become very manifest. Yeah, but you know,
we are lucky in a way.
But but the problem I'm still dealing with is, in order to overcome the problem, right? Should we, or do we have to go beyond the de-animation, right? Do we have to recapture a sense which we have in poetic forms of, you know, when you look at songs or poetry or so, and actually even an everyday experience, right? People always say...
That's what you do.
That's what I try to do, yeah. But I wonder what you do. But that means that we somehow have to rechange again our conception of agency, in the sense of there is a kind of inner relationship to the world and not just causal interactions.
For a philosopher of science, causal interaction would be difficult now to see anywhere. I mean, it's highly rehearsed. Whenever scientists talk about cause and effect, it's actually they have rehearsed the cause and effect. First we had to discover it.
Yeah.
And when we discovered it, start from the effect and go to the cause. So
Yes,
Then you have to rehearse it. Then you have to introduce it. Then you have to pedagogize it.
Yeah, that's what you said. Yeah.
Cause and effect is certainly not the way the world is made of. I mean, it was an idea of before the intensity of the ecological crisis came in, and here we're exactly on the same line.
Yeah.
Because the more you make people resonate with one another, so to speak, the more we shift. Basically, the solution is to hook all of the argument we made on ecological transformation with your sociology. I mean, if you put the two together, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that sounds like a good way to end, right?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
And thank you to the French and
thanks
German
to the organizers.
Good.